Over the past 5 years, there has been no shortage of Spider Man content for fans of the franchise to consume. Sony's Into the Spider Verse and Across the Spider Verse are two animated movies with an overwhelmingly positive reception, and with a third film slated to release in the next year to round out the trilogy. Disney's Marvel has released three films starring Tom Holland as Spider Man. Heck, even the video game space, we've seen Sony release very successful games that also tell compelling Spider Man stories. With all this in mind, you could assume that general audiences don't need more Spider Man. However, after watching this series, you would be wrong. Your Friendly Neighborhooded Spider Man is a new Marvel animated series on Disney Plus that has just brought its first season to a close. This story follows the same Peter Parker as the MCU movies, set in a slightly alternate reality. In this series, instead of attending Midtown and meeting up with Ned and Mary Jane as he does in the MCU movies, this Peter is intercepted by a symbiote in battle with Doctor Strange in a clash that destroys the school and leads to Peter being bitten by the radioactive spider that gives him his powers. This event is essentially the what if moment that sets this story apart from what we are familiar with in the MCU. Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider Man benefits from the audience following the perspective of a version of Peter Parker who we've already been introduced to and gotten to know. Since we are so familiar with this version of Peter, this series gets to hit the ground running while introducing many changes and twists to the versions of how events play out in this universe. In this universe, instead of Ned, Peter befriends Nico, who becomes his best friend on his first day of school. And she actually has an implied secret of her own. They don't dive too much into this season with that, but it does seem like in the future we are going to be playing with that with her character. However, for the purposes of this season, Nico's existence is there to add a layer to Peter's personal life that he has to balance alongside his other responsibilities. We also see Peter establish a close relationship with Harry Osborn, who is in on his secret as being Spider-Man very early on. As a Spider-Man fan, I think it's very exciting to see Harry included in this story, especially this early on. His dynamic with Harry in other Spider-Man stories has always been one that's very compelling for me, and so seeing them lay the groundwork for this was a very strong choice. There's also Pearl, who is essentially a stand-in for Mary Jane. She's the popular girl at school who Peter idolizes and has feelings for, who happens to be dating Lonnie, a character who quickly became my personal favorite while watching this series. Lonnie is a star quarterback player who is shown to have good grades and a bright future ahead of him. This all changes, of course, when he gets roped into joining the 1/10th street gang in an effort to spare his brothers from dealing with them himself. This commitment to a new criminal lifestyle leads to Lonnie abandoning his educational and sport prospects. I will say, Lonnie of all characters is given the most screen time, at least of all the side characters. We watch as his character is slowly radicalized to becoming a leader within this 1/10th gang, and by the end of the season, we see him fully become Tombstone, a character from the comics who, as you could guess, his body is as sturdy as stone. The other aspect of this show that truly sets it apart from our MCU Spider-Man is the inclusion of Norman Osborn. Norman Osborn, of course being Harry's father, inserts himself into Peter's life much like Tony Stark does in the MCU, highlighting the ideological differences of these otherwise very similar characters. Both are genius tech billionaires with lofty ambitions. However, as we see by the end of the season, Osborn's ambitions lead him down a darker path. Osborn does not play the role of a direct antagonist, at least not in this season. He's actually a helping hand. He provides Spider-Man with resources to take his crime fighting to the next level, as well as giving Peter personal opportunity in the form of an internship with Oscorp. Now, the internship is an interesting setup as it introduces many characters that we will likely be playing bigger roles in the future of this series. However, in this season, these characters do not impact the main story too significantly. We are introduced to Amadeus Cho, rival and at times adversary to Peter with a very storied history in the comics. We also meet Jean, who is largely underused but is shown to be working with Daredevil, who himself makes multiple cameos throughout the season. Jean is also referred to as Finesse in this role that implies that she's kind of like Daredevil's sidekick. The character that I'm most interested in from this internship is one named Aisha. She's an exchange student from Wakanda who is shown to be just as intelligent as the others, but has a warm, welcoming relationship with Peter. I always wanted to see Shuri and Peter team up in the main live-action MCU, but we never got to really see that, and I'm hoping that this relationship will develop further and hopefully fill the shoes of that dynamic that I wanted to see in the future. The main enemy of the season is the Scorpion, whom Spider-Man goes toe-to-toe against multiple times throughout the season. I've got to say, this version of the Scorpion is probably the most lethal depiction that I've ever seen. He was very menacing, and every time we saw him, it was clear that he had the intent to kill. The Scorpion was actually given his enhancements from Otto Octavius, who you would probably know more well as Doc Ock, and is introduced this season to perhaps be the main antagonist of next season. But in this season, he plays more of a background role, and we just get to check in with him multiple times throughout. The Scorpion, Otto Octavius, the 110th Street Gang, and Norman Osborn, they all have these plot lines that are intertwined and culminate in the climax of episode 9. This series is juggling so many characters and so many plots. I was really impressed by how seamlessly they tied the plots together and provided not only a satisfying conclusion to all of them, but teased so many more plot lines to come. The symbiote and Doctor Strange that we see in episode 1 even turn back up in the final episode when Osborn insists on opening his own interdimensional portal in the name of scientific advancement. We even get a fun time loop moment where, through the time travel shenanigans, we recontextualize the opening scene of the first episode and how Peter gets his spider bite. I thought this was a really engaging moment, and it was something I wasn't even expecting. I didn't feel like there was any mystery behind that opening scene, but them coming full circle with it was very satisfying as a viewer. The entire action sequence in the series' climax was engaging, and the choreography was a lot of fun. While the animation and art style are at times jarring and even tough to look at, whenever there is action being depicted on screen, it looks great. Part of the fun of any Spider-Man story is the inventive ways of using his webs and swinging around in fights against his enemies, and this series has those moments in spades. Unfortunately, in the smaller moments, the series' animation style can feel a little stilted and even lifeless at times, but when it's time for these characters to actually knuckle up and get into the fighting, you completely forget about that. When you're in the suit and you're fighting the enemies, the animation is great and it's engaging the entire time. To be honest, I've only barely scratched the surface on all the details that is packed into these 10 episodes. And again, I'm blown away by how they were able to seamlessly tie all these plots and characters together. Peter's relationship with his Aunt May and his close friends provided a strong emotional core that effectively grounded this story in a sea of what otherwise would be a chaotic mess. Looking to the future of this property, I'm excited to see how they handle plots like Peter's father being alive and in prison, Nico's backstory with her mom, Harry and Norman Osborn's potential development as enemies, and of course Lonnie's inevitable future as the leader of a criminal organization. And can we please talk about that theme song? It is so fresh and funky, and I have not been able to get it out of my head for weeks. To be honest, I really enjoyed watching this series. Again, I was skeptical coming in because I just didn't feel like we needed more Spider-Man content, but I found myself having so much fun watching this, and it took me back to being a kid watching Saturday morning cartoons. If you were a fan of Spider-Man at all, but in particular if you enjoyed the Spectacular Spider-Man or any of the animated series prior, I think that you'll find a lot to love out of this season. They also tie in a lot of characters from the MCU, so if you are an MCU head, I think that there's a lot of satisfying and fun moments throughout as well. So I find myself asking the question: is there such thing as too much Spider-Man? Your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man would beg to differ. This series gave fans of the IP much to love and discuss while spotlighting yet another space for Spider-Man stories to be told moving forward. I'm beginning to think that there is no such thing as too much Spider Man. I think that we will just continue to get more and more Spider Man stories until this Earth explodes. But how about you? Have you reached a Spider Man overload? Did you watch this series? Did you enjoy it? And what is your favorite introduction to the Spider Man space? Do you enjoy the MCU movies? Are you into the Spider Verse movies more so, or do you like the video games? There's comics. There's everything. There's really, if you are a Spider Man fan, there is no shortage of content for you to consume this day and age. Thank you very much for watching this video. I do appreciate it. If you have any questions or if there's anything that you want me to cover in the future, let's get a conversation going in the comment section. I want to hear how you feel about Spider-Man and specifically your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. And with that, I am out of here. Remember that I love you.